Well, hi everyone. And I'm sorry I could not make it there to be there in person today. I was sitting in traffic this morning for a good 20 minutes, just not moving whatsoever, and just thinking to myself, do I just make the mental call of calling it right now, turning around, making a video, and doing that ubiquitously for all of the sections instead? And the answer I came to was yes. And it was actually kind of funny. The second I got done typing that email and getting it sent to you all, it was immediately like, traffic starts slowly moving again. But I hope everyone was all right. I didn't get to see what the accident was because I was too far away from it. But good vibes into the world. And consider it a free day where you just get to listen to me or watch a video on what fallacies are, what they do, how they function, and what we can use them either strategically for ourselves, which we would have practiced today, crafting our own fallacious arguments, or you can figure out if other people are making bad arguments and being able to call them out is a good life skill that we should potentially be able to have. I know a lot of you are like, whoa, that's what his face looks like. And yeah, I know it's weird being able to talk to you without a mask on. So without further ado or time wasting mechanisms, please give me your attention for a bit. And as with always, if you ever watch a video from me, what you should know is that you can always just put me on in the background, put me on the side. There's not going to be a lot of visuals that you necessarily need to pay strict attention to. It's more of as long as we get kind of conceptual ideas down, we're going to be in a better place. At least moving forward, to be able to say, hey, that's fallacious, even though I don't know the correct terminology to use. There's also a lot of moments in which fallacies kind of blend and bleed back and forth into one another in different points in times. And so there's never a right or wrong, like, oh, this is clearly always going to be the slipperiest of slopes that we're walking down, or we are arguing consequences, and that is not going to be ideal. But instead, we can say, okay, we know something is not right here whenever we hear somebody making what would be hypothetically a flawed form of argumentation. So let's hop into it. So the first one we're going to kind of talk to is this idea of arguing from your consequences. So in a lot of ways, that's comes from our cost benefit analysis, where we identify the goods and bads of a certain kind of circumstances or outcomes that are going to potentially happen to us in life. We sometimes tend to make those more important than the actual reasons for doing things. It's a very utilitarian, greatest good for the greatest number, which is contra to a deontological kind of point of view where you always take the ethically correct decision that you're going to make for the day. So I guess those are your hypothetical words for the day. But it takes a utilitarian perspective and says these are going to be the terminal valuations of like, this is what will happen. And I'm going to say that this is either going to be a good thing or a bad thing based upon what is happening there, instead of evaluating and analyzing the actual premises and conclusions of an argument itself. And so, for example, the one I hear most that people make egregiously, and kind of a lot of scholarly arguments make in kind of political rational theory, is that nuclear weapons are cool or good because there hasn't been a major conflict between two nuclear nations. It is the mutually assured destruction logic that people tend to throw out there as kind of the burden of proof that nuclear weapons are good for the world. However, that doesn't necessarily make them safe. That doesn't make them kind of rational beacons of maybe an international stability. All that means is that in the short time span in which we haven't had nuclear weapons, someone shot them at each other yet. And so it doesn't prove these kind of overarching claims. In this world, if we are all good students of Toolman, we need a qualifier on to make it sound a little bit less as complex as it is. There's also going to be other times where maybe one of your friends doesn't really want to go to a movie, and so they're just bashing on going to a movie, for instance, because they're arguing from those consequences. And you're just like, okay, Sally, I didn't want to go to a movie with you anyway because you talk during it and you think the world is all about you and no one likes you anyway. I don't know. Sorry, Sally. Anyway, next up is the straw man argument, which is not gender correct to say because it probably should be a straw person argument. But regardless, it tends to get categorized or at least called the straw man. A straw man is when you mischaracterize somebody else's argument to make yours look more beneficial or at least a little bit more favorable at a certain point in time. And that is mainly to make sure that you're highlighting kind of all of your goods while making theirs look net worse. Now, this tends to happen whenever you're in an argument with somebody where they're not kind of being as sincere or fidelitous to the terminal end goal, which is to have argumentative clash to produce kind of knowledge claims of truth, but instead you take your axiological bias and you kind of just throw out there that, hey, okay, Tommy, for instance, is now saying blah, 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 when really he was actually saying maybe we should be chill or something along those lines. I don't know. It's really hard to come up with a concrete example off the top of my head because it really is just taking somebody else's thing, making it your own, but worse, so that when you say that it's bad, it sounds a little bit better. You'll see this happen in the news functionally all the time when they're talking about any sort of like politician that you don't like. You'll just be like, oh, yeah, they're doing these policies which are meant to murder children or something along those lines. Clearly, that's not the case for most of the way it's being phrased, or most of the debates are actually occurring. We tend to highlight or analyze all of the bad things that happen. Remember when Obamacare was coming out and people were like, there's going to be inherent death panels everywhere. It just taking the lowest common denominator of what is the worst case scenario and then presenting that as kind of the normal thing to argue about, because who in the right mind doesn't like death panels? I don't know. Okay, appeals to a relevant authority. This one's my favorite, where you just, and you know my kind of stick on expertise in citations is that people tend to cite just random folks at random points in times, and it doesn't necessarily always make sense when they're citing those things. If you think back to the crazy guy we've seen a couple times that was arguing that the world is actually in a cube, he's wearing an MIT researcher hat. Even though we have discussed not really an MIT researcher, but was asked to be a guest lecturer there, which consequently means we should be very careful where we allow certain individuals that are a little bit more crazy to speak, because we can inflate their expertise just by the mere fact of performance. In a lot of ways, communication at a certain stage or time allows you to claim that expertise as it is what we were talking about, a demonstrable way for you to show your ethos off at a given space and time. And so figuring out why the person who is qualified to speak is actually qualified to speak is kind of on the role of the audience member, and we shouldn't always just kind of take it for granted whenever some sort of hypothetical expert is put on stage. If, for instance, you want to cite me on bees and say Aaron Swanlek thinks bees are sky terrorists, and be like, oh, he must be a leading researcher on bees. No, he knows absolutely jack shit about bees besides his masculinity always gets threatened every time a bee rolls up and he starts screaming and running around because they are actually sky terrorists and they're trying to kill us all. Okay, equivocation uses the fluidity of language. You'll hear me say that a bunch, that language is fluid. All of that means is that it isn't kind of set in stone what interpretation of a word means. A word can mean something a little bit different to each individual in and of themselves, and also they can be used in different kind of ways that allows them to be more like a river when it comes to interpretation and meaning, rather than kind of a slate palette of these are the words and that they are going to be good. Equivocation, for instance, uses kind of that slipperiness of language to be like, maybe we insert another interpretation of the word here to kind of get us out of an argument. There's an example right here is how can you be against faith when you take leaps of faith all the time. Faith in one way is being utilized in a more traditional philosophical interpretation of faith. Leaps of faith is a term of art that just applies that you're taking blind belief into something, just moving forward. Those two terms don't necessarily kind of equal one another, and that is when the equivocation innately and inevitably occurs. A false dilemma. False dilemmas are, and I'm going to make sure I'm recording right now because I hate it whenever I think I'm recording and I'm actually not, and then I feel like an idiot because I just wasted 25-ish minutes of time. Hi, I am recording. Okay, I'm going back to it. Hi, I just wanted to say hi really quick. Surprise, I know I'm technologically inept. I'm innately a boomer at heart, even though I'm probably not because I hate all boomers anyway. The false dilemma. Okay, a false dilemma is when you take a situation and only provide two potential outcomes that can occur. So either A or B must be true in this scenario, and it kind of divulges the possibility for a C to exist in the first place. So you either love UMD football or you're not a real UMD student. Would make a two-case scenario, even though you're probably like most of us where you're like, you hear UMD football and you laugh because you know they're probably going to lose anyway, so you don't want to go waste your time watching it, could be a very rational and easy way to have that position. Or, for instance, you could say, and this was super relevant post 9/11. When you're fighting terrorism, you're either with us or kind of against us in that world. And so you must be all about the war on terrorism and spending money to go have military conflict, or you're a terrorist yourself. Was kind of an ideology that was pervasive because of events and kind of a culture that fostered that idea. And so having an understanding of when false dilemmas put us into a box of reason is pretty good for us to understand when more potential things could happen that could lead to better outcomes, better resolutions, and allow us to have a more holistic purview whenever we're analyzing or looking at the world. Next up is not a cause for a cause. This is just purely a correlative based fallacy where you assume just because one thing happens, ergo another thing happens. The fire happened, you didn't listen to your parents. Aaron wakes up every day, sees the sun come up, ergo Aaron makes the sun come up. It uses the warrant, aka that connector thing, and just makes it a bold assertion that they're going to be true without doing any of that explanatory kind of work to kind of back up that those two things have kind of a causal relationship with one another so that they do directly impact what they are and what they do. Next up is appeal to fear. Appeal to fear is just the situations in which you are more afraid. It's kind of like an argument from consequences, but it innately uses the pathos, kind of emotional constraint of fear to say, hey, you're super scared, so take this action instead. You'll see it all the time whenever it comes to like political advertisements every 4 years, where it's just like this person will kill you if you vote for them, or something else along those lines, and tries to use fear as kind of the governing rationality of population control, to say, don't do X action or this consequence will happen. But we never discuss what the kind of pros and cons of this action are in the first place. Next up, we got hasty generalizations. You take a small sample size and you think to yourself, this must be everything in the world. And it's easy to do because if we think back to our like kind of sliver of reality, Kenneth Burke moment, that we have a very limited subjective interpretation and perspective over the entire world. So we're kind of stuck inside of our own interpretive schema. Now, whenever we tend to see things, we habitually kind of like categorize and rationalize how they work, how the world works. So it makes sense to us to kind of have those moments of interpretation. The hasty generalization says you see it happen a couple times, ergo it happens every time. I rolled a d20 dice. I don't know if there's any of you D&D nerds out there. If there are, fight the power, or do the right thing. I don't know. I'm just saying words now. But anyway, you roll a 6 a couple times and you're like, oh, this dice must only roll 6s because it's happened 3 times consecutively. But sometimes it just happens 3 times consecutively, and there's a litany of other things that could be occurring or happening. Another example is I say my UMD students this semester are the best students ever. Ergo, every UMD student is the best student ever. This just might be a great semester for me. I have awesome students this semester. However, maybe the other semesters I just got really lucky and had great students. And guess what? I just assume that all of the people that I'm not working with are the greatest of all time. I go out and I assume that of another student. Maybe they're just like, who the F is this guy? He looks kind of stupid. I hate him. And I'm just like, oh, that wasn't very neat or cool for a UMD student to say. And so that breaks my perception of what the world is. Next up are appeals to ignorance. This is just the you don't know something exists, so it could, which makes it a compelling case for it to kind of exist. So because I know that no one has ever seen aliens, or because the universe is so big, there's probably a good case that aliens do exist and are out there coming for you. It's kind of the logic or the example that I would use. Or you've never not seen the Sasquatch, so he's probably out there hanging out in the woods doing Sasquatch-y things. I don't know what Sasquatch-y things are or what they do in the woods, but hell, he's probably out there doing Sasquatchy things. Is kind of that appeal to ignorance, because something it can't be proven, that makes it evidence that it is out there and is going to be true, because you can't say that, hey, it is not true. Now, where this gets a little bit hard is in the kind of like sciences or science-based arguments, because we live in a world where scientific rationality says that you have to super prove something to be true. There's only like 5 or 6 completely true statements that are going to be made in science. That like 0.00001% chance that it is not true because it has not been irrefutably proven tends to let a lot of like folks that are kind of a-holes be like, oh, well, only there's this one scientist one time that said that climate change isn't actually caused by people. And so that makes it just as equal, right? Yeah, you'll hear that kind of malicious intent from folks that are clearly benefiting from hurting or robbing the environment blank, which is probably another fallacy to be put into there, is a more practical use of the term. The no true Scotsman fallacy is just one that uses identity and one's commitment culturally to be a part of an identity and says you must take these actions. It's kind of like a societal peer pressure of sorts to be considered part of said group. No real UMD student misses a football game. No real UMD student parties all night and skips their class the next day because they're hungover or something along those lines. They are just your kind of intentional way of saying what is correct and not correct based upon value statements where you can subjectively police a lot of other individuals, which is probably not cool. No one likes people that kind of police other people's kind of identities. You can impolite words to that. And then 2, it is also kind of a means of just being like, this is the right way. I'm going to dehumanize whoever doesn't think the same way as me. I'm going to remove their patronage from this group, which at the end of the day, we all want to feel like we belong somewhere because not belonging anywhere is kind of depressing and sad. Guilt by association. Guilt by association just says that your idea, which was taken up by probably a demonized group, also makes your argument just innately bad. So to say, because you believe healthcare should be free and a universal or human right. Well, that was brought up by, let's say, left organizations. Now I have to say that it's bad because left organizations are bad. And it makes a lot of looking at the group that the idea comes out of as opposed to the actual arguments themselves. You've probably heard me reference Heidegger in the past. That dude was a Nazi, total dick, but he did have some good ideas that we try to take away from those moments. Now, if you're like me, back in the day, I used to think I was a troll and being like, yeah, we should totally just burn all of the bad people's ideas. I had a full classroom of just video people being like, did you really just say we should get rid of all of Leni Riefenstahl's works? I'm like, yeah. And I just like have never seen just so much nerd rage just all directed at me at the same time. And it was just like, I am that guy. Yeah, and I had an existential crisis after that. I'm like, oh God, I'm that guy. But whatever. Anywho, appeals to hypocrisy. This is just when you respond with a you too type fallacy, where it is you do this wrong, but you also do this wrong. That doesn't mean we're having a discussion about you doing something wrong. It's just a way to deflect kind of the blame. I'm sure a lot of you have friends or peers that do it too. Whenever you say, hey, I don't like this about you, and they're like, but I don't like this about you. It's just like, that's not really what we're discussing, but we can branch that off and have that discussion later. But let's talk about you first, or figure this out of what is going on correctly or incorrectly with the things that are being made or the things that are being said is kind of the intended intent of the appeal to hypocrisy. And it's a good way to get out of an argument. Your guardians or parents probably have at some point in your life, whenever you get mad at them, say, but you do X or something along those lines. And you can probably say, okay, now I know, you win. Because the hypocrisy that they get to have is earned because they exist and they're older than you. I don't know. Life is stupid. Okay, the slippery slope fallacy. This is just catastrophizing at its greatest, where you look at a small circumstance or happening that occurs, and you say that that small circumstance or happening is going to be indicative of a bunch of greater things happening that are negative and bad, and is going to have some sort of giant collapse. We as individuals tend to do this. This is one of those things that our brain is mean and does to us all the time, where something goes wrong in life, and then all of a sudden it's going to lead to a chain, and then all of a sudden we are now having the worst lives that we could have lived in. And it's a lot of anxiety that gets built into those situations where we're just like, okay, something little's going wrong. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. Everything's super awful. It's just something we all do. We do this in language all the time too. So we tend to have a bunch of folks that look at events. This is also particularly true in international relations theory, where we're just like, okay, these two countries stop trading together. Well, maybe that means they'll get more confrontational because they have no economic incentives to talk to one another. Now, that confrontation is going to lead them to start a fight over maybe a proxy war of another country or city state. Blah 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 blah. Is kind of an event that happens where a lot of like risk analysts are just like, that could definitely happen. Is kind of the areas in which you see a lot of these slippery slopes manifest themselves at different points in time. The appeal to bandwagons are just because you believe a lot of people think something to be true, then that must make it true. All UMD students think that dressing casually to class is the right way to be, so I'm going to dress casually to class, which doesn't necessarily make the argument good, but what it does do is just do that kind of identity in group kind of thing we talked about earlier, but it just says that that is proof that other people do it, ergo it must be right. This is also a caveat because a lot of conspiratorial kind of understandings of the world use the appeal to bandwagon and just say, okay, you're just bandwagoning on whatever everyone believes is true. That's not to say that like a lot of people believing in something isn't evidence of something. And what that something is can be evaluated independently of the argument in and of itself, such as you see here. All UMD students think Penn students must suck, so ergo they must suck. Ad homs, speaking of which, as we attack a person's character or a group's character, ad homs are one in which we, instead of replying to somebody's argument, we insult them personally instead, because it lets us get out of the situation. We try to denigrate their worth or demonize that individual. Maybe you don't like an argument I'm saying right now, and you're like, Aaron looks stupid, so I am not going to listen to him today. That is an ad hominem attack. It doesn't really respond to an argument, doesn't respond to a debate, discussion, or clash, and instead it kind of just says something rude on the inside. And now, after I'm done videoing this video, I can just go stare into the mirror and give myself a bunch of compliments and tell myself I'm not going to cry, and maybe I won't this time. Ha ha ha! Gotcha. Anywho, circular reasoning. These are often tautologies, aka circular logic. I'm sad because I drink, and I'm drinking because I'm sad. Aaron is right because Aaron says he's always right. They tend to just make claims and have those assertions be the evidence, the backup, and just use those conclusions to say, hey, this is this, this is this. And this is how the world works. It's kind of a way that usually uses expertise to just be like, this is how it works. And you say, I guess this is the case. There can be nothing wrong with this tautological argument that is just a giant metaphorical circle where the conclusion works as the premise, and the premise then leads to back to that conclusion in kind of a very silly and not really helpful way. These are kind of the main fallacies that I wanted to talk about today. What we were going to do instead is break into small groups and kind of craft our own. But unfortunately, we're not going to have time to do that today. Instead, you get a small reprieve and a nice video from me to be like, hey, be fallacious. Use these to your advantage if you need to. And also, you're able to call people out if they are being fallacious at different points in times. Like everything, fallacies are just a typical tool for you to use and utilize as kind of your toolbox of sorts. So that you can say, hey, I need to maybe get out of this argument. Maybe I'll levy back some hypocrisy and be like, you too do X, Y, Z, and get out of that situation. Or maybe someone's doing that to you and you can be like, yo, that is fallacious, one. And two, here is why your argument is bad, and so forth. These are issues that you'll see tons of times when you're reading, working, or writing. You'll notice other individuals doing that, and understanding that will really help you just say what is good and what is bad. And so thank you for bearing with me today. I hope you're all having a wonderful Wednesday afternoon, and I will see yins on Friday. Cheers.